One of the ancient Greek philosophers said, "You cannot step at the same river twice." And I was thinking about it. Can we really know ourselves if ourselves keep changing constantly, day by day, hour after hour? When you wake up in the morning, you're in some sense different person. And what you should do, you should recognize your new self. You should recognize the changes that happen to you and keep happening constantly. Because we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, we're constantly learning. There's no other way around. There's nothing to learn about yourself but the changes that happens to yourself. And this common question, can we understand our subjective experience? Because if yourself is constantly changing, what about our subjective experience? Does it change as well? It cannot stay permanent. It depends on the changes that happen to you. If you're a different person, your subjective experience becomes different. You perceive objective reality differently. We have to control our changes, because if your changes process on a conscious level, if you're in control of your changes, then your changes becomes meaningful and your subjective experience becomes better, and your idea of yourself that comes to you through the changes that you experience and you controlling becomes more accurate. Because what happens is, when you're learning about yourself, slowly you start discovering the changes of yourself. And once you discover the changes of yourself, you can control actually those changes. You can be in charge of those changes. You can direct and channel those changes to the certain ways, on the certain roads, by injection certain ideas inside of those changes to be able to control them. And this control gives you much more clear idea of yourself. And then this clear idea of yourself helps you to perceive the objective reality through your subjective experience much more accurately. That's, I think, what this ancient philosopher meant when he said, you cannot step at the same river twice, because river keep floating. The same with you. I think every 7 years, every molecule of your body changed. Or even on a physical level, you are different every 7 years. How about on your level of self-awareness? Does your self-awareness changes as well with your physiological changes? Because I remember myself when I was much younger, and it's like absolutely different person. You have to adapt to a new environment, and you have to step beyond your comfort zone. If you constantly stay on the same level, if you constantly refuse to push the boundaries, then what happened to you? You stagnate in your development. The funny thing about it is you have to change. There's no buts, you just have to change. And you can be in charge of those changes, or you can let the environment affect your changes. You can let the environment changes you. And it's usually bad, because the best way to be in control of your changes. Because once you're in control of your changes, you're in control of your future. You're in control of your present. And in some sense, you make more sense out of your past. But if you stop controlling your changes, if you give environment to control it for you, then you're on the mercy of the outside world, and you have to constantly readjust your subjective experience depends on those changes. That's why I think you can develop cognitive dissonance, because you don't know yourself at all. Your yourself depends on the objective reality of the outside because you're not in control of your subjective experience, since you trust more subjective experiences of the others. And that's what objective reality for us in some sense. Objective reality for us, it's a union of a bunch of subjective experiences of others. Yes, that's what I think objective reality. It's really hard to understand fully what objective reality is. There is, of course, such a fundamental principle of objective reality like material things, but I'm trying to understand what is objective reality through perception of your own subjective experience. Because people have their own subjective experiences, and what kind of objective reality they see totally depends on their subjective experience. And the value, the quality of their subjective experience depends on how they know themselves. And the quality of knowing yourself depends on the changes you're in control that happening constantly to you. In other words, before knowing yourself, you have to identify changes and you have to control those changes. You have to be in charge of those changes. Once you identify your changes, you understand yourself through those changes, and what happens is your subjective experience becomes more accurate, since in some sense you're in control of yourself through being in control of your changes. And then you start shaping your subjective experience by changing objective reality, in some sense affecting other people. For example, if you absolutely in control of your biology and you propagate proper changes upon yourself, and you know those changes and you're in control of those changes, and you don't let environment affect you in a worse way to create cognitive dissonance within you, what you do, your subjective experience becomes much more healthy, much more stronger, and therefore it's affect objective realities, which nothing else but a bunch of subjective experience of people around you, and this way you affect the subjective reality by affecting subjective experience of other people. And that's how, in some sense, people create unity through intelligence or through tyranny. There's two options. Through tyranny, what happens is people force others by intimidating them through biological annihilation. They just execute people who they don't like, or suppressed, oppressed, or genocide. But I think the best way is to use intelligence, use argument, use reasoning. That's what Greek philosophy is incredibly important to understand, because what happens is you have to have reasoning. You have to create fortress of reasoning to protect your subjective experience. Once you create this fortress of reasoning, then you slowly try to explore objective reality. But again, come back to this idea of knowing yourself, know your changes, know and control your changes. I think it's the most important thing. And once you know and control your changes, you can actually reshape yourself constantly. In years, like the age doesn't matter, because you can reshape yourself in any age. Of course, the older you are, the harder is to reshape yourself, since you're more solid in your certain ideas that can be wrong. But the younger you are, you don't have enough experience, and you have to have certain people you can trust. It's really hard to find right people you can trust. It took me a lot of years to understand my own self and the changes. Once you understand yourself and then you understand the changes, what you do, you start reasoning with yourself. I like to have conversation with myself. I try to understand, okay, what should I change about myself? And mostly it's always on the level of biology. Your biology, in most cases, is your enemy, because it always wants something bad from you. It always wants to sleep longer. It always wanna more food than it necessary. It always wanna procrastinate. It always fearful of something. It's always like have this such an bugs in the system that you always have to correct, always have to debug. You always have to use this mind antivirus on yourself and run this antivirus constantly every day. Okay, now I have changes, right? Every morning, every day I have changes within myself and I need to push those changes. But there's a box in the system that prevents me from installing those changes properly, these updates, this software. And what you do, you run in the system, you run an antivirus through your observer, like your mind, this observer who watches from a third person, your own self. And this antivirus scanning your system entirely and checking, okay, and then you understand, okay, this fear is overrated, it's incorrect. Okay, this idea is incorrect because it's rooted in biology, and this idea that this food is bad and I don't need to eat it, this, I don't need to watch this, I don't need to waste time on this, that's why I'm procrastinate. You always try to analyze and reason with your faults because, okay, I make mistake here, I make mistake there. It's really hard to push myself, but I still have to push myself. And once you make a habit, constantly scanning yourself, almost like a antivirus within yourself that able to scan it, then you start developing great habit out of it. Because you shouldn't act if you believe that procrastination is a bad thing for you. You shouldn't do this. If you know something is bad for you but you still keep acting upon this bad thing, you create dissonance within yourself. Because if your mind tells you this piece of cake is a bad thing for you, or this alcohol is bad for you, or cigarettes are bad for you, or this relationship is bad for you, and you keep still propagating those things, then you create cognitive dissonance because your biology divorcing your mind. And once they divorce your mind, they start competing. It's house divide with itself. And it's really hard to live this way. You have to create harmony. And the only way to create harmony is to trust your mind and suppress your biology, control your biology. That's the only way. There's no other ways around. And to do this, once again, it's you have to know yourself. But knowing yourself, you have to know your changes and you have to control your changes. And once you're in control of your changes, your subjective experience becomes more accurate because your subjective experience comes from harmony within yourself. Because those changes that you propagate, you know those changes, you kind of scan them and you know they're right, based on the good rights habits. And once your changes are good, you're in control of them, your subjective experience becomes much more sophisticated and your understanding of objective reality becomes more clear and your life becomes much more meaningful.